The violence can be sudden and it can be brutal.
This, the ugly, violent side of Italian football. Running street battles involving groups of ultras.
For people unfamiliar with ultras, how would you define what they are?
At their core, it's a community grassroots organization that starts to support one soccer club. The club becomes their identity in a way, and for so many, and particularly in the 1970s, which sees a raft of attacks from both the far left and the far right in Italian society, became a hub of community, one that ended up being perverted by the far right and produced what we see today. But at their core, they're grassroots community organizations that provide people with meaning in a world that was devoid of much. Ultras culture has kind of been around, but it really kicks into gear in the late 1960s. We see the birth of official supporter clubs that are sponsored by teams. Teams give jerseys and merchandise to these groups of fans, and this is largely born out of the post-war boom that the Italian economy sees. The war really changes Italy in a way that is akin to the Industrial Revolution in places like France and England. And the stadium became a hub of community and definition for internal migrants, for countless people who were looking for community in these new lands. And the ultras become outgrowths of these official supporter clubs doing more and becoming more important in these people's lives. They guide not just the activities on a given Saturday or a Sunday, but take over people's lives. They are embodied in piazzas across the Italian peninsula. They create bars and community centers and newspapers and become really definitions and ways people stop being people and become ultras, and in that radicalization can happen. So unlike what we see in North America where it's go, insert team, go, in Europe the songs rest in deep folkloric tradition and they ultimately are a place of ritual. These chants are devised by what are called capos, or the bosses of ultra groups, who control the chants and the tifos or banners that they create. These banners are rich in allegory and alliteration, and in a way they come to represent the town that they are a part of. Unlike in North America, Italian clubs represent the city in a way that is much more tangible and much more real because they're outgrowths of community. Clubs form either through union activities in the late 1800s or other sporting activities that were created, and the ultras then feel that they have a sense of ownership over what is called their bell tower, or campanalismo. The idea of representing their bell tower pushes many to associate the club with the city, but themselves with the city and the club in a way that becomes significantly more than a North American club would be. So in the 1950s, there is the resa dei conti, which is the keeping of accounts that sees the settling of scores between Italian partisans and the Italian fascists in the immediate post-war period. In that period, there is the recreation of the so-called New Italian and a New Italian man that is anti-fascist, but at the same time, these fascist groups still exist. The MSI, which is the Italian Fascist Party, is born in 1956 out of the remnants of Mussolini's old government, and they continue to operate in Italian parliament and Italian life throughout the 1950s and 60s. The 1967 sees the birth of the Italian 68 movement, which is bloodier, lasts longer, and much more totaling than anything seen in peer countries. And in the end leads to the Anni di Pombo, which starts in 1969 when 3 fascists blow up the agriculture bank in Milan, known as Piazza Fontana, and injure upwards of 80 people, killing 17. This is the opening of a period of proto-civil war, if you read some scholars, including Annacento Bull, and it is pervasive in Italian life. At the same time, young people are growing up in an age where there's less opportunity, less unionization, and a push for a better life, both in the factory and in the classroom, and it spills out onto the streets. There is clashes between both groups, but it's also the revival of a lot of fascist narratives and a lot of fascist martyrs who come to represent what Dr. John Foote calls a divergent narrative within the Italian culture. Ultras are involved in countless terrorist attacks, whether at a grassroots level or at a higher level. I think the example that stands out the most is one ultra was involved in the very founding of NAR, which is a radical far-right group that is responsible for a turn in fascist ideology in the 1980s, and also participates in the bloodiest attack of the Anni di Pombo, which is the bombing of Brescia and the Bologna train station bombing. The Bologna bombing claims the lives of over 80 people and is directly tied to Lazio's curva, or Lazio's end of the stadium. And on top of that, ultras are involved in low-level politics throughout and are frequent members of far-right groups and far-right meetings. And the links continue throughout the entire period and up until the modern day. Unfortunately, it continues to move to the far right. Italy is currently led by some would describe as a neo-fascist government now under Giorgia Meloni. The far right, and particularly the cultural far right, seems to be winning. I think what has kept coming up like time and time again in my research is that the trends are very similar. We're living through a moment where the cultural far right is very prominent. There are deep connections between Mussolini's family and Lazio. His son is currently playing in the academy, and most recently there was the performance of the Sig Heil at a Lazio match, but also chants and banners that connected Lazio to its fascist past. It's also important to remember that these groups absorb and reinterpret what's going on a day-to-day basis, and as we see the rise of the far right, it's not a surprise to see the rise of the far right on the curva as well. As we search to explain, I think it's important to foreground ideas of community, but ideas of physical space in the ways that people's lived experiences push them to one political ideology or the other. And on the Italian curva, in these movements that are so much about community and searching for belonging in a society that is very difficult to be a young person in. Life is very hard for these people who have so-called done it, quote-unquote, right, and gone to school and gotten an education, but have been stunted. And these groups provide easy answers to very complex questions and are, in some people's cases, the only community they have.